Hi, my name is Mustafa Adekunle Ahmed. So I thought about something this morning. Religion and how important it is and how it affects everything that we do. It reminds me of the undergrad days because we're very privileged to have very good, brilliant lecturers like Professor Igwe, Dr. Akande that taught us history, through prehistoric architecture, through different civilization, all the way to the modern architecture. And in these courses, we could see the importance of how religion has evolved all the way to the present age. So an idea came to my mind. Why not have a sit down with one of these great minds and let you and I educate ourselves on the beginning of religion, how and when it came into Nigeria. So I've been trying to get Dr. Akande to sit for some minutes and have a talk. It's no lie, it's been really difficult, but I was able to get to him. And here is what he had to say.
So my name is Deyemi Akande. I'm an art and architecture historian with the Department of Architecture, University of Lagos. I am particularly interested in sculpture, but added to that, I find church history and church architecture a sentimental topic for me. All right, so the question is, when did foreign religion get into Nigeria? By foreign religion, I imagine you mean the two old religions of the book, that's Islam and Christianity. In this case, Christianity will probably be more in the picture because it then ties us to England, who were colonial adventurers. I think it's important to say from the get-go that the people who occupied the space we now call Nigeria, they've been in contact with the Arab world for close to 400 years, even before the Europeans came near. In fact, up until the end of the 4th century, all forms of communication between the whole of West Africa and the outside world was essentially done through the Sahara Desert, and the Berbers of Northern Africa had a lot to do with it. Also the caravans that would come from the Arab world into the fringes of the desert.
There are evidences to show that caravans transporting goods and itinerant Islamic scholars have been traversing the desert to make contact with Africans at the fringes for over 1,000 years.
So there are two main accounts of how Christianity came to Nigeria, and to a certain degree of accuracy, I think it's safe to say I can call them the Catholic account and the Anglican account. Obviously, there are several other accounts, but these two are the oldest that we know. Now, the Catholic account appears to be less known. It's usually used as a footnote, and you'll find stories attached to early Portuguese mariners visiting the Bight of Benin to come for trade and glory. But on the other hand, the Anglican version is a more boisterous, robust story of how Christianity came. It would often speak of the enterprise organized by the British government to come and save the dark continent, as they used to call Africa at that time. The light that they proposed to bring, technically, is Christianity. Or, to put it more appropriately, I would say is trade with a chance of Christianity.
According to what Dr. Akande taught me in my second year, in 1841, after months of debate and lobbying on the floor of English Parliament, a group of evangelicals finally succeeded in convincing their house that it is in everyone's interest to put an end to what has become an obnoxious trade in slaves and seek some humane economic relationship with the interior of Africa. With this as a background, the stage was set for formation of Society for Extinction of Slave Trade and Civilization of Africa in 1839. In the forefront of this crusade were men like W. Wilberforce, Clarkson, and later Sir Thomas Fowell Boxing. Their combined efforts with the help of the British government led to the now famous 1841 Niger expedition. Though generally seen as a failed attempt, the expedition is often referred to as the beginning of Christianity in Nigeria.
That would be true, but in context of the inquiry we're speaking about here, it would not be quite accurate. The very first contact of Christianity with the space we now call Nigeria happened about 350 years even before the Niger expedition. and it happened in Benin. So the Niger expedition was in 1841. 3 vessels were commissioned to come to the coast of West Africa, particularly to the Bight of Benin. They were the Albert, the Wilberforce, and the Sudan. On their way from England, they had stopped at Sierra Leone to pick up representatives of the Church Mission Society, and 2 key figures got on board. First was the Reverend J.F. Schoon. So a German ethnographer, was a linguist and a missionary, extremely brilliant linguist, I must add. Then the other key fellow is the former slave boy, Samuel Ajayi Crowther, who was later to become the very first black bishop in human history. The thing with the 1841 mission was that it was generally regarded as something that failed because it ended abruptly. The sheer amount of mortality amongst the white members of the expedition generally affected the impact of the expedition. The reason for the death is simple: malaria. In spite of the shortfalls of the expedition, certain inroads were made into the propagation of Christianity and also trade treaties all through Niger Delta, Agbo, and places just right above Agbo. Unlike the 1841 expedition that ended abruptly, and in fact the impact was only to be seen in further expeditions, the earlier visit of the Portuguese that happened about 350 years before this 1841 expedition has a different story. In fact, if I were to answer your question directly, that when did we have the first contact with Christianity, it will be in the 15th century through the Portuguese.
When the missionaries arrived, the people of Onitsha were at war with their neighbors, the Ogidi people. And as a consequence of this war, a great number of houses were deserted in the east part of town, where a constant lookout was kept for approach of enemies. According to Crowther's report, 20 Onitsha men were killed as against 3 of their enemies. In the state of these affairs, Crowther stated, Onitsha people welcomed European traders and missionaries in order to strengthen their own positions. The people of those days would do anything to gain the fear and admiration of neighboring villages. Perhaps this was the reason the Oba of Benin in 1472 welcomed a white man into his town for the first time in their history.
In 1472, there was a Portuguese mariner called Kieje Sequeira who had visited Benin. This was during the time of Obaiware. This is the oldest account of a white man entering into the space we know now as Nigeria. Unfortunately, not much was achieved by way of a relationship for this 1472 visit, because at that time Obaiware was at the point of restructuring Benin and trying to forge it into an empire. It will be 13 years later, in 1485, during the reign of Oba Ozulua, another group of Portuguese mariners had made their way to Benin. The reception at this time was a little more welcoming. In fact, this was said to be the first time when the Portuguese were actually welcomed to court, as against Sequeira's time, who he wasn't even received at court. Now, at this time, I must mention, is the first documented time when the gospel of Jesus was preached to the Benin people. How it flourished is another matter entirely, because in spite of the fact that there were a few converts and priests, catechists were made of certain members of the Benin tribe, it appeared to us in history that the king Ozulua and the Portuguese were actually more interested in something else, something the Portuguese found in Benin, which they call pimenta de arbo. It's pepper. This is not the pepper we hear about in Idugora in Lagos. Pepper had been an important product and a basis for the negotiation of relationship since antiquity in Africa. On account of the provision of pepper to the Portuguese, the relationship got fired up and it appeared that it would be sustained. But no sooner than the Portuguese left, and probably the smell of the incense they used for certain masses in Benin at that time faded into thin air, that the Benin returned to the traditions of their father. The arrangement between the Portuguese and the Benin at that point was a thing of strategic positioning. The law at that point was that you could not sell ammunition to any state who was not a Christian state. So it made sense for the Benin people, probably under the pretext of wanting to get trade with the Portuguese, to accept Christianity, however superficially, and then engage in trade. This, I suspect, is what happened, because clearly after the Portuguese left, they returned to traditional worship. More than Benin, in fact, it was Warri. Warri received the same set of Portuguese trader cum missionaries, and the records show that the Warri people were a bit more accepting of Christianity, because unlike Benin, where the religion did not quite thrive quite quickly, in Warri, reverse was the case. It was accepted and it thrived, and there were no noticeable interruptions to the growth of Christianity in Warri for about 200 years. The then Olu of Warri, around the late 1500s, is famed to be the first Olu of Warri who became a Christian convert. He also is said to have gotten Western education through the aid of the Portuguese. The religion has not only survived, it's also thrived in this space that we now call Nigeria. However, it did not do that without its own share of challenges. The story of the Reverend J.C. Taylor comes to mind. He was a young former slave from Igbo extraction who came with the Bishop Ajayi Crowther in much later years to Onitsha. In fact, J.C. Taylor is recorded to have been the individual who started the first Christian mission in the whole of the Igbo country. J.C. Taylor, supported by Simon Jonas, was instrumental to the propagation of Christianity among the Igbos in the early 19th century. An important thing he minuted in his journal was on August 20th, 1857. That was the first Sunday he spent in Onitsha. He was to have a service. And in the service, he had recorded that he had an attendance of about 200 to 400 naked people. That's a very tough crowd to preach the gospel to. He was luckily joined by sailors and some men from Sierra Leone who were also Christian converts at that service. And one very touching and interesting note he made was they haven't preached the sermon for the first time in the Igbo country. He was joined by the Sierra Leoneans and they sang the hymn, Jesus Shall Reign Where the Sun. The hymn is beautiful and apt, if you ask me. It's a hymn composed by Isaac Watts in the late 17th century, and the music, the popular tune for it, was composed by John Hayton.
spite of challenges and forced modification to religion, one can say it has thrived through the years as evidence in growth and followership of the faith.
Yes, absolutely. I would say that the religion not only survived, but it thrived amongst the people of Nigeria, probably more of the lower Niger. In spite of the pressures and the challenges, it is still here today, and it continues to fight for a right of place in what I might call our collective consciousness.